How we paid 4% income tax on $420,000 of income in 2022.
White bitch chillin' on the table. Juicy got horns of a halo, yeah. Bite my lip, but it tastes so young. Suck my soul till I don't got none. All of her friends wanna have some fun.
And you're probably thinking, Kale, 4% income tax, you probably have like an offshore account somewhere in some island or some country. No, this is all in Colombia. We have our SAS or LLC in Colombia. So this is all in Colombia. It's all legal, 100% legal. And today we'll be showing you how you can do the same if you have a business or are working in Colombia. And I'm also sitting next to my beautiful girlfriend, Luisa. She's a lawyer and she helps a lot with these things in our business. And she's gonna explain a little bit more about how to actually go about and do this, the correct company structure and setup.
So how we do this is that we have our company registered under the régimen simple structure, that it's different to the régimen común, that it's the normal structure that usually companies go for. But this is a structure that the government implemented to incentivize people to start businesses here in Colombia. Businesses in Colombia under the régimen ordinario, the normal one, pay taxes of 35% income tax, which is the highest rate in all America.
All of Latin America. I think,
All of
right?
Latin America.
And in the US, it's like 21%.
Yeah, I think it's the highest one in all America, like taking into account Canada, United States, and Central America. Like the continent of America, it's the highest, like businesses pay the highest tax rate here. So in order to incentivize people to like start businesses here, the government implemented this régimen simple where you're paying between 2 to 11% tax depending on the activity you do and also depending on the income you have in your company.
And one quick clarification, we pay 4% of gross. So this really only works if you have a high cash flow business with not many expenses. Like us, we have Airbnbs. We really don't have that many expenses, just rent, employee costs, things like that. So it really makes sense to have the 4%. We're paying 4% of gross versus 35% of net, because our like revenue is like 5 times probably more than what our actual expenses are. So it makes total sense to do this.
Because on régimen común, the normal one, you're paying 35%, but you can deduct all of your expenses. I would recommend that someone that starts, for example, a law firm business, to go with régimen común, because usually in law firms you pay really high salaries to your lawyers. So at the end, the utility is really low. Like you make money, but you pay high salaries and you have a lot of expenses. So in that case, I would recommend going with régimen común because you can deduct all your expenses and at the end pay 35% but after but of the net. As I was mentioning before, this is a new structure to incentivize people to do business, and it's kind of like a new structure. I think this started like 3 or 4 years ago, like actually to move Colombia's economy. To apply to this, you need to be a resident in Colombia. You need to be living here for more than 180 days and that your home base is Colombia. You can apply for this structure even if you're a foreigner. Only with your passport you can open a Colombian company here and you can apply for this benefit. Take into account that if you've been living in Colombia for more than 180 days, then this place is going to be considered your residency. Tax residence. So you have to declare and pay your taxes here.
And that's even if you're working in the US, you have a company in the US, as long as you're like living here for 180 days, you have to pay taxes in Colombia on your worldwide income. And another thing to keep in mind, in the US, you also still have to report in the US. It's like the only country in the world where you have to report and pay taxes on your worldwide income. So even if you're living outside the US for the whole year, there is one exception to that rule. It's called the foreign earned income exclusion. And basically, if you live outside the US for 11 to 12 months of the year, you're excluded taxes on the first $120,000. After that $120,000, then it's like a normal, starts at like zero, basically. However, if you are paying taxes in Colombia or another country, you're not going to be double taxed. You can write off the taxes that you pay in Colombia or whatever country you're living in and write that off against the taxes that you would be paying in the US. Again, you still have to be reporting all your expenses, income, everything in the US, but taxes paid in other countries, you can write off against the taxes that you would be paying in the US. And one quick disclaimer before we get too far into the video, don't take this as like the ultimate tax advice. This has just been like our experience. We've talked to probably at least a dozen tax people in Colombia and the US, because it's kind of like a unique situation that I'm in, at least, where I'm responsible for reporting to 2 countries. So it is like a little bit of an extra like headache that you're gonna have to do, let alone keeping books for one country and reporting to one country is like enough. But take that into account when you move to another country or you start a business in another country. It's just another thing that you have to think about.
So coming back to the régimen simple structure, you need to take into account the following things. The first thing is that you cannot make more than $700,000 a year. If you go beyond that amount, then you have to go with régimen común, with the normal structure.
But I would imagine that you could open 2 different companies in that situation if you're making more than $700,000.
It depends, because they're going to take into account your 2 companies and the percentage of shares that you have on each company. Okay. So you need to take that into account. Again, like what Kale was saying, you need to, of course, talk to your personal accountant and go through your personal income and situation, because every case is different. Another thing you have to take into account is that with this structure, you need to report your taxes every 2 months, different from like the normal one where you only do it once a year. In this case, you have to pay it every 2 months and declare it every 2 months. But this is an amazing alternative, because even though you're declaring your taxes every 2 months, with régimen simple, they make it like way easier for you to file them, because in one form that you're filing, you're declaring all of the taxes that you need to declare and pay in Colombia as a company. The last thing I want to mention about the régimen simple structure is that even though we mentioned that you cannot deduct anything from your you cannot deduct any expense, the only thing you can deduct in this case will be the pension that you're paying for your employees if you have employees. Otherwise, there is no other expense that you can deduct from your taxes.
And it also depends on the kind of business you're doing as well. Louise explained that the tax rates would be from 2 to 11% depending on the business that you're doing. For Airbnb and tourism, there's also some additional taxes that we have to pay. One is a tourism tax, like a fontour tax, and you can explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the fontour tax is a tax that you pay if you run a tourism service. It could be accommodation, or if you're a tour guide, like everything related to tourism, you have to pay this tax that's called fontour, but it's a really, really small amount. Like I can tell you, we paid like $200 for like a little bit more, like $300 for 1 year. It's a little amount, but you need to really pay this tax. If you don't pay this tax, they are gonna delete your RNT number. If you run a tourism service, we've mentioned the RNT number before in like other videos. If you don't pay this tax, they're gonna delete your number. And also, like if you have listings on Airbnb, they're gonna delete those listings if you don't have your RNT number. So you need to take into account the fontour tax if you're running a tourism business. And you also need to take into account the IVA, like the VAT tax that you have to pay. In Colombia, this is 19% and it's really, really high.
Yeah, and this is something that's like exclusive to Latin America. I think all of Latin America has a value-added tax, Europe as well. I guess it is kind of like a sales tax, kind of like in the US. So I guess it's not totally exclusive, but I guess what is exclusive is like the rates that they charge. Like all of Latin America, it's like around 20%.
Yeah.
Colombia is 19%. It was, I think, 5% through the pandemic.
It was for like some businesses. For tourism, they like completely eliminated that tax to incentivize people to travel and like to incentivize like people doing tourism services, like to start their businesses doing that. But starting this year, 2023, you have to pay the 19% tax. It's like the consumer that pays it, but that like elevates your rates a lot. The consumer could recover, like if you're a foreigner and you come and travel to Colombia and you pay like hotels, restaurants, whatever, you can like claim that 19% at the airport with DIAN, that it's like compared to the IRS. It's like a really like annoying process, but you could recover that whenever you come to Colombia to travel as a foreigner.
I guess one question that I have in the back of my mind that I don't know if you can answer, is why does Latin America have such high wild like income taxes or value added taxes? Because I know in the US it's like 6 to 7% depending on the state that you're in. Do you have any idea why it's so high here?
Like, I don't know why is that, but I just feel like the US is like a more consumer oriented country, and they also incentivize people to do business there. Like, actually, like in the States, I feel like people are more incentivized to start businesses, to sell stuff. Here in Colombia, like, or even in Latin America, it's like the governments don't have the mindset of like incentivizing people to start their businesses, do business, like for money to flow, I feel. And it's just like too much corruption that, like, I know there's corruption everywhere in the world, but I feel in Latin American countries, corruption is like times 3, times X. And I think that's the reason. I feel like the United States is such a consumer-oriented country, and like it's just like not the mindset that we have here. That should change. That's why the government implemented this régimen simple, that I think this should have been implemented like many decades ago, to incentivize people to do business, because that's why like many people here in Colombia start their businesses like under the table. They like don't declare taxes. They do things like they want you to pay everything in cash, so they don't have to declare anything to the government, because there's no trust in the government. And I just feel that that can be the reason. It's just what I think. Maybe it's not like the truth, but that's what I think.
Yeah, and I'm sure if they actually did cut the corporate tax rate, like the normal one, from 35% to a more like normal rate, maybe like 20%, like the US, I'm sure that would make the economy boom. But yeah, like you're saying, I think it's not really in the politician's mind or the kind of the way of thinking here, that everything is kind of like static and not really like an expansive mindset, I guess. That they think it's like a fixed supply of money, and you know, like if you take money from someone, then that's like the only way to get ahead.
Yeah, I think like Latin American countries like have a lot of work to do on their policies, public policies, especially like tax policies. And what you're mentioning, it's just about like the mindset, and like the corruption here. Like there's many things behind that I don't really want to talk about in this video, just because this is like too public, but there are many things behind like public policies and politicians and a lot of interest involved that make it harder. But again, it's not about like trying to pay the less taxes, but to make more money. Well, at the end, you're going to be more incentivized to do business if you're paying a lower tax rate, but you have to pay taxes everywhere. Just like with this régimen simple, it's amazing. It's an amazing opportunity to do business here.
And it's relatively like quick and easy to do. It's not like you're having to set up, I mean, there are ways to set up like structures and kind of ways to go around paying like almost zero income tax. But those are pretty like complex, and you end up having to pay lawyers, tens, if you're a company, if not like hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up those structures. So, I mean, I guess it depends also how much you're making. If you're making millions of dollars, it makes sense for those companies to pay $100,000, $200,000 to an accountant, set up a complex structure where you can kind of get away from taxes. But for us, it's really easy. It doesn't take too much time to do this, or like we have an accountant that does everything. Everything's already set up, 100% legal, so we don't have to worry about, you know, going around the law. So that does it for this video. We went off on a few different tangents, but to bring it all back together, if you're making under $700,000 in Colombia, you can do régimen simple, and you'll just have to do the numbers. If you know your net profit is high enough to where it makes sense to do the régimen simple, versus if you have a lot of expenses, then it's probably going to make more sense to do the normal corporate structure. And if you're looking to set up a business in Colombia and have any more questions, Visa offers free consult calls. Link to that will be in the description. She can help you set up a régimen simple company or give any advice on corporate law, corporate matters. She also set up a new Instagram account where she's going to be putting out a lot of free info on there. And yeah, again, if you want to book a call with her, it's free. Link is in the description. And if you have any more questions about doing Airbnb, want to get started with Airbnb, I also offer consult calls. Yeah, that does it for this video. We hope you got some value from it, and we'll see you guys in the next video.